Imagine if kings fought their own wars, if rulers stood on the battlefield themselves. No armies, no generals, no contracts. Just two leaders facing each other, deciding the fate of nations with their own swords. This idea appears in the film Troy, and it represents a very old view of war, a time when conflict was seen as a matter of honor, a duel between rulers. But the world does not work like that anymore. Modern wars are not fought by kings. They are fought by systems. Systems of factories, systems of contracts, systems of finance. And behind every major conflict, there is a deeper question. Who actually runs the machinery of war? Because today, war is no longer only about armies. It is also about economics, about supply chains, about credit, about industry. In many ways, modern war is not just a political event, it is an industry. But this transformation did not happen overnight. It began centuries ago. During the late Middle Ages, European monarchs faced a new problem. War was becoming expensive. Armies were larger. Weapons were more complex. Campaigns lasted longer. And most kings simply did not have enough money. This is where a new type of power entered the stage. Bankers. Italian banking families, often called the Lombards, began lending money to European rulers. Kings borrowed funds to raise armies, to buy weapons, to finance campaigns. For the first time in history, war became closely tied to credit, and one family would take this system even further. The Fugger family. German bankers who became some of the most powerful financiers in Europe. In the early 16th century, they played a decisive role in one of the most important political events of the era, the election of the Holy Roman Emperor. When Charles V sought the imperial crown, the Fugger banking house provided the enormous funds needed to secure support from the electors. In effect, a banker helped decide who would rule a vast empire. Money had entered the heart of power. At the same time, the structure of war itself was changing. In Venice, something remarkable was happening. The Venetian arsenal had developed a system of large-scale ship production. Hundreds of workers built warships using standardized parts. Historians often compare it to a kind of early assembly line, 400 years before Henry Ford. Weapons and warships were no longer crafted individually by artisans. They were being produced in large numbers. War was becoming organized, industrial, and profitable. The next major transformation came during one of Europe's most devastating conflicts, the 30 Years' War. From 1618 to 1648, large parts of Central Europe were destroyed by continuous fighting. Religion was the public justification. Catholics versus Protestants. But behind the ideological conflict, another reality existed. War created demand. Armies needed iron. They needed gunpowder. They needed uniforms, food, horses, and equipment. Supplying these armies became an enormous business. Neutral states and merchants often sold materials to both sides. Countries like Sweden and the Dutch Republic built strong trading networks that supplied military resources across Europe. Conflict created markets, and markets created profits. The next leap came in the 19th century, with the rise of industrial power. During this period, steel became one of the most important resources on Earth. Steel meant railways, factories, and weapons. One family rose to dominate this industry in Germany, the Krupp family. Their steelworks produced massive artillery and advanced weapons. By the time of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, German steel technology gave Prussia a decisive advantage over France. Industrial capacity had become a military advantage. Factories could shape the outcome of wars. Another figure of this era illustrates the strange moral paradox of industrial warfare. Alfred Nobel, a brilliant inventor who created dynamite. Dynamite revolutionized construction and mining, but it also transformed warfare. Nobel later became deeply concerned about how his invention was being used. After his death, his fortune funded the Nobel Peace Prize, an attempt, some historians say, to balance the legacy of a technology that made destruction easier. By the early 20th century, war had reached an entirely new scale. The First World War was not just a military conflict, it was an industrial enterprise. Factories ran day and night producing weapons. Rail networks transported millions of soldiers. Entire economies were mobilized for war. And finance once again played a crucial role. At the beginning of the war, the United States remained officially neutral, but American banks and companies quickly became major suppliers to the Allied powers. One name stands out in particular: J.P. Morgan. The powerful American banker acted as the primary purchasing agent for Britain and France in the United States. Morgan organized loans, managed large purchases of weapons and supplies, and connected American industry to the war effort. By the time the United States eventually entered the war, its financial system was already deeply tied to one side of the conflict. This raised uncomfortable questions. Were economic interests influencing political decisions? In 1934, the United States Senate launched an investigation, the Nye Committee. Its goal was to examine the role of banks and arms manufacturers in the First World War. During the hearings, critics began using a powerful phrase: merchants of death. The argument was simple. If companies and banks earn enormous profits from war, they may have incentives to support policies that lead to conflict. Whether or not those accusations were fair remains debated. But the investigation revealed an uncomfortable truth. War and finance had become deeply interconnected. The Second World War intensified this relationship even further. Military production exploded. Factories produced tanks, aircraft, ships, and ammunition on a massive scale. At the same time, something unexpected happened. The enormous military spending helped pull the United States out of the Great Depression. War spending stimulated industry, created jobs, and revived economic growth. After the war ended, this system did not disappear. Instead, it became institutionalized. In 1961, the outgoing President of the United States delivered a remarkable warning. Dwight D. Eisenhower, a former general and supreme commander during World War II. In his farewell address, Eisenhower warned about the rise of something he called the military-industrial complex, a network of relationships between the military, defense contractors, politicians, and industry. His concern was not that these institutions existed. They were necessary for national defense. His concern was that the system could gain too much influence, because powerful incentives were now embedded in the structure. Workers depended on defense jobs. Investors expected profits. Politicians wanted economic growth and employment in their districts. And companies sought government contracts. Together, these forces created a powerful cycle. Military spending supported economic interests, and economic interests supported continued military spending. War preparation was no longer an occasional event. It had become an ongoing industry. Today, that industry is global. Modern military spending reaches trillions of dollars. The United States remains the largest arms exporter in the world. But other powers are rapidly expanding their own military industries. China, European nations, members of NATO. Defense budgets continue to rise across the world, and the technologies involved are becoming even more complex. From artillery and tanks to satellites, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and advanced microchips. The tools of war have changed dramatically, but the underlying incentives remain surprisingly familiar. War is no longer simply about kings, armies, or ideology. It is also about contracts, factories, investments, and economic systems. Which brings us back to the original question. Who really controls war? The answer may not lie with villains or conspiracies. More often, it lies in incentives. Systems of incentives that reward preparation for conflict. And as long as those incentives remain profitable, the machinery of war will continue to operate. Understanding these forces does not solve the problem, but it helps reveal the hidden economics beneath the surface of history. Because sometimes, the most important forces shaping our world are not the ones we see on the battlefield, but the ones we see in the balance sheets.